Do it. We're live.
Here we go. Fear Not Podcast. Awesome. Well, yeah, Rich, really appreciate you doing this.
Yeah.
It's an honor to talk to you. This is super exciting for me. You've done a bunch of cool stuff in your life. Military, professional. You're an author, which is something I admire because I've always wanted to write a book, and maybe I will one day. Takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
I'm sure you could vouch for that, but yeah, super excited to get to talk to you today.
Well, it's an honor to be here. It's good to finally meet. So
yeah, likewise.
So thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, no, it's super cool. So I guess I'm so many questions, but your path. We can start today and probably go backwards to figure out sort of like how did you get here? But you've got 2 books.
Yes,
correct?
2 books. Yep.
Masters of Uncertainty and The Attributes.
Yep. Masters of Uncertainty, the most recent Attributes, published in 2021. So
right.
yeah.
And the books are effectively, maybe they're a bit different in their own right, but like they're kind of geared towards what makes a person perform well in a given circumstance.
Yeah.
Especially those that are dynamic and throw sort of challenges. I know you have that example that's visceral of like you get a call and there's an emergency and you have to rush to the hospital.
Yeah.
Which like definitely makes you think, but you have you like I think a lot of people are like I don't know how I don't know.
Most people aren't, or they've been through those situations, but they've been so kind of stressed and autonomically aroused they haven't been able to kind of autopsy their performance in any way. But I think Chris, I mean, one of the things that I think we have the advantage of, and you'll resonate when I say this, is we've been through a crucible that is unlike most that any human get to do, and just leave aside the actual job of being a Navy SEAL, just take the training itself, and you're talking about something that's very unique.
Yeah.
You and I just in talking prior to this, I had the same feelings as you did, going through the teams as an officer, as a leader, but even just as a SEAL. And what I call it is what I kind of termed it a healthy imposter syndrome. In other words, just like, we could compare numbers. I'm sure they're similar, but I think we started with 180 in buds, and we've graduated like 38 or 35.
Yeah, it's about the same.
Yeah, which is about the same. That's about average. But I remember, even then, we were graduating. I looked around. I was like, "How am I still here with all these rock stars?" And but that feeling was more. It didn't give me anxiety or self-deprecation. It wasn't deprecating. It was really what it did is it sparked me to be better, to live up, to kind of do more. And what I realized, and it continued wherever I went through my career, whether whatever new command or next level I went, I felt that same thing, and it just made me push harder and perform better. What was interesting to me as I went through my career, and we all become friends and we all begin talking about this, is I recognized that most of the other guys, we all felt the same way.
Right.
We were all thinking the same thing, and so that really it geared me to start trying to understand what it is about us that allows us to do what we do. And as I began to dive into that, both kind of psychologically, neuroscientifically, and even physiologically, or mentally, I recognized it wasn't just Navy SEAL stuff; it was human stuff, and that really made me say, "Oh, actually, if it's human stuff, then we can take the SEALs off the pedestal, and we can basically start talking about this and articulating it to people, and they can use it every day."
That's a great point, and I've wondered, even with myself, and I would say that I have a pretty high stress tolerance, just in general in life, and I can sort of multitask, and it's not like I don't lose a wink of sleep.
Yeah.
I do, but I can deal with it. Is it like nature or nurture? Like, I make it through buds because I'm good at handling stress, or am I good at stress because I made it through buds?
It's yes and yes, basically. So in other words, what I'll say is, and so just to give the audience a little bit of context, the Masters of Uncertainty book, the second book, is the book I always wanted to write, and it kind of outlines all these processes and what we're about to talk about. The attributes is a part of Masters of Uncertainty. In other words, one of the things you have to understand about yourself is the attributes you come to the table with. So, so kind of
and those are innate.
And they're innate. Yes, there's a nature nurture type thing. Okay. So, and we can get into that, but so kind of in an unconscious genius move, I wrote the attributes first because it's a much larger subject.
Yeah.
So that Masters of Uncertainty, which is a much shorter, kind of punchier book, I could just do a chapter on and say, hey, you need to know attributes, learn more here, right? All right. All this to say, the tools, the techniques, the things we do in stress, challenge, and uncertainty, every single one of us who makes it through Buds has to have some element of that day one of Buds. We have to. It's not going to be developed to the degree it needs to be in Buds. We have to have an semblance of that, and whatever we did in our past, whatever experiences we went through that allowed us to build that, to include the attributes we came to the table with, allowed us to start stepping through Buds. In Buds, it became hyper developed. And then through our career, it became hyper developed. But even Buds is such a brilliant crucible that your basic Buds grad is going to act the same way. We expect how that person's going to act, and what they're going to do is they're basically in stressful, uncertain times, they're going to calm down and they start working the problem. And they're not going to sweat over things that they don't need to sweat over. And those are very basic things that we do. When you say you handle stress very well, the answer is I would say I totally agree. But it's not necessarily the stress you're handling. What you're doing is you are able to walk into or even have a situation dropped on you, and you automatically begin to chunk it down and problem solve and move through it. You don't waste time with things that are ancillary to what the issue is, and it's because you've hyper-developed that capability.
Interesting. Yeah. So let me ask you a question, because I've done just the most, I've Googled. I'm a Google scientist. But you've done a lot more. So this is a question that I've had. I talk about type 1 and type 2 decisions. Type 1 being I do the wrong thing. Type 2 being I don't do the right thing. So you want to and I've seen this mostly in business culture, especially. It's almost non-existent, I would say, in the teams where we're very risk thirsty. We might just take a risk for the sake of it. But in business, people are worried about losing their job or looking foolish or whatever. So you tend to worry about the type 1 error.
Yes.
I don't want to do the wrong thing because the doing the wrong thing is very visible. It could have consequences potentially, versus if I do nothing, maybe I don't do the right thing, but it's a lot harder to figure out, Chris should have done that and he didn't. So so that's where people become apathetic. And I've analyzed the stress. And so the fear. So fear, if there's an imminent physical threat, you have these chemicals that release in your body and it makes your organs stop so your muscles can get more blood and all these things. I'm sure I'm butchering it.
No, you're right though.
But because then there's a fear of right now there's a tiger in the room. But about okay, I want to write a book. But what if people don't like it? What if it sucks? What if it's what if nobody will publish it? So then that fear causes you to do the type 2 error. I'm not going to do the thing I should have done. Versus I'm going to take the risk to make a mistake. How does that? Because that plays out over a long period of time.
It does. Yeah, it does.
Physiologically or psychologically or mentally, how does that? How would you? Is there a comparison between the imminent threat and the dopamine and the adrenaline and all that? And those stress hormones that prevent you from doing things that you should have.
There is so the chemicals are the same. What we had to do is kind of break into the neuroscience of it, and this is where I became very fortunate. Right after I got out of the Navy in 2017. I got linked up with and became friends with a guy named Andrew Huberman, who's now a very popular podcaster.
He is.
This was before the podcast. He was still just talking about maybe doing a podcast, but
cool.
He was running a fear lab at Stanford, and we went. I went to visit him there. I in fact brought my family there, And he was fascinated with, so first of all, I was fascinated with the neuroscience. What he'd do in the fear lab was it was basically a room, a virtual reality room where he'd put goggles on someone, but he'd hook them up with nodes. And in that virtual reality space, he could program in the flavor of fear that they may want. So it could be, he had one where you're swimming with great white sharks. He had one where you could go to the top of 2 skyscrapers and walk across a plank if you're afraid of heights. That's my flavor. It could be getting attacked by spiders, whatever that is. And then he would measure what was happening in the body. So I was really fascinated with the neuroscience that he was putting forth. He was really fascinated with how guys like us do what we do. Like, what is it that you do? Mm-hmm. And so we began to mesh those and put it together and begin to generate these tools and techniques, most of which are in that second book, Master of Uncertainty. What's happening, first of all, is when so one of the things we hypothesized, and I believe correctly, is that fear is a combination of 2 factors. Those 2 factors are uncertainty plus anxiety. Okay. In other words, you can have one or the other, and you don't necessarily have fear. You can be anxious but not uncertain. That's like, I have to give a presentation next week at work. I know the presentation. I know the people I'm giving it to. No big deal. I'm not uncertain, but I'm a little anxious.
Yeah.
Not necessarily fear. You can be uncertain without being anxious. Well, that's every kid on Christmas Eve. Okay, we know there's no fear there. It's when you combine the 2 that you generate fear, and fear is what happens. Fear is what we're talking about now. The fear response is a true, full-blown autonomic response. Our autonomic arousal's rising, our amygdala, our sympathetic system's taking over, our amygdala, our threat detector's getting tickled. What's happening as our autonomic arousal rises is our frontal lobe, the decision-making part of our brain, logic, is starting to recede, and our limbic brain, or the lizard brain, if you will, emotional center, all in charge of our emotions and a lot of other things, begins to come forward. Okay, in the most extreme cases, in autonomic overload or amygdala hijack, what's happened is your frontal lobe, the decision-making part of the brain, has fully receded, and your limbic brain is taken over, and you are acting without thinking. Okay, now this comes in very handy for things like running from the tiger or jumping out of the way of the moving train. Okay, where it doesn't come in handy is for 99% of the other things that we have going on, which is that almost that type 2 decision you're talking about, where you're uncertain, you're unsure of doing the thing, of doing anything, versus you do nothing, versus decision 1, you just do something.
Right.
Whether it's right or wrong, you do something. Well, in autonomic overload or amygdala hijack, we're going to do something because we're not thinking about it.
Oh, interesting.
So what we have to understand about managing this fear is we have to work to get that frontal lobe back online and begin to make logical decisions. Now, there's 2 ways to do that, and the 2 ways are to buy down either one or both of those 2 equations. You buy down uncertainty or you buy down anxiety. Okay. Now, buying down anxiety, just to start there, because we can kind of brush over that real quick, because it's really about managing your autonomic arousal. There's a lot of tools. First of all, let me say anxiety. Anxiety is not what we think it is. Anxiety is, in fact, we have to reframe anxiety. Anxiety is, in fact, fiction, okay? Because anxiety is always about what's ahead of us that hasn't happened yet. Now, the stress that we feel from anxiety is very real. That's very present. But everything that we're thinking about in the future hasn't happened yet. It's complete fiction.
Right.
This is one of the reasons why you'll never see Navy SEALs worry about shit they can't control, because we don't waste our time with anxiety. We do now. It doesn't preclude proper planning. Planning is fine. But we don't overplan, and we don't suffer paralysis through analysis. We pick a couple things to say, this might happen, generate a plan. Okay, we're going to move out. Then we're like, hey, whatever happens, happens.
Yeah.
This is also why we'd be flying into combat in our helicopters, and the guys around us would be napping, because we're saving our energy. We're not going to worry about all this stuff that's ahead of us because we've already done it. But for the average Joe or Jane, you can manage your autonomic arousal through breathing techniques, respiratory techniques, or visual techniques. Our visual system, when we're in stress and fear, tends to focus in. So one of the techniques I talk about in the book, and I have a couple, is called open gaze. All open gaze is you're looking out. If you're looking out ahead of you, instead of focusing on a point, you're just softening your vision. So that you're basically, if you were to put your hands out to the sides, you could see your peripheries, right? It's just a very soft vision. This has been proven to reduce our autonomic arousal and calm us. This is exactly why sitting on a beach and looking out on the horizon calms us. It's why looking at a scene, a mountainscape calms
So that's
us.
as simple as just think about what's in your peripheral vision.
Well, or just softening your gaze. So example would be, starting public speaking. That's not something I was used to, and I was nervous when I did it. So I'd get up on stage, and instead of kind of focusing on things, I just look at the back of the room and just let my vision soften. And someone could practice it by just picking a point on the wall, and instead of staring at that point, just stop, just let it soften, and now your gaze is, we do this all the time, to be honest with you, but this, you can do it deliberately. So that's a visual tool. Respiratory tools are about blowing out that carbon dioxide. And when we're stressed, people are under the false impression that, for example, when we hold our breath, the stress that we're feeling is because of a lack of oxygen. It's in fact not. It's because of a buildup of CO2. This is what we learn to some degree in buds. Certainly freedivers learn this, is that you can blow past that initial discomfort because you have different oxygen stores you can pull from. Problem with that, and I don't recommend it for anybody, is once you blow past that initial warning sign, you don't get another warning sign. So in other words, you just pass out. So that's why that happens to freedivers. We've had a couple SEALs die because of that. They've been doing breath holds. So don't practice it, but just know that the stress is because of a buildup of CO2. We can begin to blow out. There's ways we can blow out CO2 and calm our autonomic arousal. One of the most effective and easiest tools is called the physiological sigh. The physiological sigh is simply someone takes a very deep breath through the nose, tops it off, and then a very slow exhale. Slow, controlled exhale. Does that 4, 5, 6 times. Proven to bring ourselves down off autonomic arousal. By the way, we do this. We might notice ourselves doing this when we're trying to go to sleep. We also might notice our dogs doing this. We hear our dogs do this all the time because they're basically calming themselves. So buying down the stress that is coming from anxiety is as easy as using some of these physiological tools. Now, this is not really what we do in the SEAL teams, because in the SEAL teams, even though the books, there's so many coaches and whoever out there who will say, the Navy SEALs learn how to breathe. They learn breathing techniques. And I was like, I never got taught any breathing techniques, other than hold your breath when you're underwater.
Don't breathe water.
Yeah, we don't. So we don't get taught breathing techniques to bring down our stress levels. The reason why we don't suffer from anxiety is because we are buying down uncertainty. Now, the way we buy down uncertainty is we begin to look at our environment and shape our environment in a way that generates certainty. Let's talk about this neurologically. Neurologically, what's happening in our brains when we are in any environment is we are trying to make certain that environment, okay? And it's doing so through three primary factors. There are a couple more that are secondary, but the three most primary factors are duration, how long this is going to last, pathway, what's my route in, out, or through, or outcome, what's the end state. If we are in absence of one or more of those, we feel that stress. We feel that autonomic arousal. So, quick example with illness, strep throat. An illness we all know, people don't die from strep throat. There's an antibiotic to cure strep throat. If you or I get strep throat, we are at a mild level of uncertainty because we have our pathway, the antibiotic, and we have the outcome. We're going to get better. Right. What we don't have is the duration. You may respond to antibiotics. It might take you 2 days. It might take me 3 days, right? Yeah. So our uncertain level is mild. Now let's take the flu. The flu, also known disease. Most people nowadays don't die from the flu, but there's no known cure for the flu. A lot of people will suggest cures, but there's nothing you can take for the flu. Yep. So we get the flu. Now we're in absence of two. We're absence of pathway, and we're absence of duration. We know the outcome. We're going to get better, but we're absence of two. So our uncertainty level, anxiety level is a little bit higher. Now imagine a disease shows up on the planet, and it's never been seen before. There's no known cure. Some people are dying, some people are not dying, and we don't know how long this is going to spread throughout our planet.
That would never happen.
Right? Yeah, that would never happen. This is exactly why in 2020 all of us felt the way we did, because we were all in absence of duration, pathway, outcome. All we do, and this is what we come to buds knowing how to do just unconsciously, and we just do it, we hyper-develop, is we do a concept, we use a tool called, procedure called moving horizons.
Make it to the next meal. That one?
Yes. Yeah. All moving horizons is picking, asking yourself, what do I know and what can I control in this moment? Yeah. And focusing on that. So what's interesting is next meal might be the thing, but I remember running on the beaches there in Hell Week with the boats, those damn boats, and it was 3 a.m, and being next to one of those sand berms and saying to myself, I'm just going to wait, I'm just going to focus on getting to the end of the sand berm. Yeah. And what I did in that moment was, by picking a horizon, I created my own duration, pathway, outcome. Duration from now until end of sandberm, pathway from here to end of sandberm, and outcome end of sandberm. Now, what's interesting about this neurologically is you are, in those moments, manipulating your own dopamine reward system. Dopamine is a very interesting, powerful chemical. We've all heard a lot about dopamine recently. We always used to hear about it as a reward chemical, but it's in fact much more than just a reward chemical. It's a motivation chemical. Dopamine is actually what gets us out of bed in the morning and gets us moving. They did an experiment with rats. They had a couple of rats, and they put these rats next to a device where they just have to push down on a lever, and a tasty pellet would show up. And of course, the rat would sit there and just push the pellet. But then they took the rats and they moved the rats away from the pellet machine, about a rat's length or even a couple of rats' length away, and let the rats go. And of course, the rats ran to the thing and just started pushing it.
Yeah.
But then they removed the dopamine from the rats, and they put the rats just a rat's length away from that pellet machine.
What do you mean by remove the dopamine?
Well, they were able to chemically remove the dopamine from the rats. So they're taking out the dopamine from the rats,
okay.
right? They put the rats a rat length away. That rat didn't move.
Wow.
And that rat would have stayed there and starved to death had they let it. And so what we're doing when we move horizons is we're chunking our environment in a way that allows us to set a dopamine level that motivates us to do the task, and then it gives us a reward at the end of the task. The reason why this is important is because these horizons are very, very subjective to both the individual and the intensity of the environment. If the environment's way more intense, then the horizon might be way shorter. I remember, getting surf tortured, freezing the surf zone.
Yeah, just get through this.
And sometimes I was just like, I'm just gonna count 5 waves. That's what I did, Or it was like, I'm gonna wait to the next meal. Sometimes it was like, I'm gonna wait. I remember being there; they'd be beating us up on the beach, and I'd be so hot and tired. I'd be like, I'm just gonna wait till I get free. I'm in the surf zone again. That was my next horizon. So, moving horizons is the technique. The technique that we use that allows us to move through this. And the reason why we don't have to worry about anxiety in those moments is because we're so focused on the next task that we don't worry about what's in the future, right? So anxiety is not present, which means fear is not present. And I think you can attest to this, whether it would be training or real world stuff. People have asked me, were you ever in a position or ever in a situation where you were afraid? And the answer is no, I wasn't. And it's not because of an ego thing. It's because when we were in those really intense situations, all we were doing was working the problem. We were going this. And I remember literally, and this happened several times, where it was only after the fact. We were back at the base, everything was done, I was in my hooch, whatever, and I started thinking about what we had been through. And that's when the anxiety, that's when I got the physiological response. I was like, oh my God, that was close, right? Yeah. Because that's when that showed up. But we get hyper developed in the ability to work the problem. This is why you say you deal with stress well. You're actually not dealing with stress at all. What you're doing is you're working with the problem. You're just like, this is what we need to do. This is what we need to do. Do this. And so this is the technique that every human being can use. The good news is every human being has done this to some degree.
Yeah.
Because we've all, even in the gym, you can practice this stuff in you can practice this stuff in environments that are certain. Working out is a great practice, right? It's just if you can exercise the muscle in all these different environments that are known, when the uncertainty hits and chaos ensues, we do this automatically. You will.
Super interesting.
Yeah.
So to go to that, so to go back to the long term thing, like I want to write a book.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but so like that type 1, type 2,
yeah,
I could either take the risk and write a stupid book, or I could not write a book at all, and I never know, it could have been the greatest book ever written.
Yeah.
And if I allow myself that, if I let the fear prevent me from doing that, it's the same chemical as if there was a tiger in the room.
Yes.
But it's like slowly released.
It's slowly released, but it's still the reason why it's debilitating you is because there's not enough dopamine in your system to do that thing. Writing a book is a huge endeavor. So the idea is, okay, I want to write a book. Cool.
Write a page.
Or not even that. Write an outline.
Right.
Write. I'm gonna write 3 blocks of content.
That's powerful.
This is the breaking into chunks, right? You set a horizon that's, in fact, it makes things certain, takes away the fear, because you don't have to be anxious about anything else.
Right.
When you say I'm going to write an outline, you don't have to worry about any part of the book other than, hey, I'm just going to write this outline.
Yeah.
See how that feels. I'm going to throw some ideas down on paper. So the idea is when you and I decided to become Navy SEALs, we did not sit there and say, okay, Navy SEAL, or like, what's step one to all the way to getting our trident? No, we started breaking it into chunks. What do I need to do? I better start working out. Maybe go see the recruiter. Do this. Read up a little bit.
Yep.
And even when we got to SEAL training, it was about, okay, I'm going to make it till the end of the day. I'm going to make it to the end of the week.
Yeah.
Hell Week, it was even less. It was even shorter DPOs. The saying at Buds. Your audience probably doesn't, but the saying at Buds in Hell Week is, if you think about Friday on Monday, you're going to quit.
You're toast.
You're toast. And they started doing exit interviews recently. It was in the last 6 or 7 years that they started interviewing guys who quit. 9 times out of 10, the story was always the same. As we had been doing this thing, we were in the middle of doing this thing, and I couldn't imagine doing it for a week later, or for 2 or 3 more days, or three more hours, whatever it was, and they 100%. Quit. They ran out of dopamine. In essence, if we pick a horizon that's too far, what's happening is we don't have enough dopamine to get there. We will run out of dopamine on the way. Whenever we run out of dopamine, we quit. Anytime you quit anything, it's because we run out of dopamine. So you pick a horizon that's too big, you don't have enough dopamine, you're going to quit along the way. If you pick a horizon that's too small, too short, what's going to happen is you're not going to feel the reward of that effort or endeavor. So you're just going to blow through it. Like, I didn't feel anything. So the good news is you can practice this. You can modulate it in the moment. So you can be doing something. And for example, if you want to write a book, so you go, okay, I'm going to write first chapter, and you start doing that. It's like, oh shoot, this is too much. And you can modulate. So you know what? I'm going to stop writing I'm going to write the first paragraph. And you bring that horizon in. So we can modulate this en route, most certainly.
And that's you're just thinking your own goal.
You're thinking,
and when you put that thought in your head and you achieve it, you've activated this
dopamine,
neurological, scientific. It's not. I like this stuff because it's actually tangible.
Yes, that's right.
It's not. It's not abstract.
That's right. This is what we
chemicals
do.
in your body.
This is what we do.
And I will say, you actually can control them.
You can control it, and in uncertainty, because this is a big deal, because I'm really about who we are at our most raw when uncertainty, when chaos hits. Right. This is now we don't know the environment. This is why the first question is the most important. What do I know, and what can I control? And you take your first step. Now, what's interesting is your first step, your first horizon could be, I'm going to take 5 breaths, and you're mixing a autonomic arousal decrease with a horizon. And you're allowing you to think. I know. I was talking. So a good buddy of mine, he went through Buds with me. He actually helps me with our business. We facilitate together. We were just together yesterday, and he was talking about how he was going through some situation with a house he bought, and it was like big snow. It was really quite intense. And he said, I stopped for a second, and I said, you know what? I just need a moment to think. I just need 30 seconds to think. That was his horizon, and this is exactly what we do in this moment. I'm going to stop. I'm going to just think. I just need time for. And again, the environment's not intense enough. It's not like a gunfight where you don't have 30 seconds to think. But it's all about, what do I know? What can I control? And you start making those steps.
Wow. Yeah. And you can. I've heard you say this a couple times. Just to reiterate, you can get better at that.
You can totally get better.
Practice.
Yes.
You do have. And
you can exercise the muscle.
Neuroplasticity.
Yes.
Which effectively means you can change your brain chemistry. Yeah. The same way as working out or doing anything. Which is,
so this is very interesting because the reason why we are able to get so good at this so fast, this is nothing Huberman and I talked about. When you learn anything, you create a neural network connection. And then as soon as you make that connection, what happens is as you learn it better or get to know it better or get better at it, you myelinate that neural network. And myelin is just this kind of substance that coats the connection like a coaxial cable. When that connection is fully myelinated, you can basically do that thing without thinking. So if you're a team guy, so you know how to drive stick shift cars. And I remember when I learned how to drive stick shift cars, teaching my boys, I taught both boys. When you first learn how to drive stick shift car, my dad took me to the parking lot. Because he knew that I was going to be all down here. I wasn't even looking out the windshield. I had to think about everything I was doing. You get better and better so you don't have to think about it. All right. So all this to say, they have proven that process, that connection and that myelination process can be increased 10 to 100 to sometimes 1,000 times based on 3 things being present in the environment. Okay, those 3 things are intensity, novelty, and focus. This is why being told a stove is hot is different than touching a hot stove. All right, this is why when we go through SEAL training, we hyper-develop this thing so fast because it's so intense, it's so novel, we're so focused, and we're doing it over and over again. So the idea is anybody can practice these techniques, these tangible techniques. the more you practice it, the better you're going to get at it, and the more you practice it in intense environments, it's gonna hyper develop it. Right. And there are some ways you can do that. One of the best ways, actually, Huber and I decided this early on, that you can practice this it's an intense environment, but not necessarily an unsafe environment, are cold baths, ice baths.
Oh, yeah. That's a big thing.
It's a huge thing. I have one in my garage, and it's 36 degrees. And I hate it every time I get into it. And people are like, well, you were a SEAL. I was like, doesn't matter. Yeah. Every time I get into it, I don't want to get into it. Because you can't rehearse cold, And so, but, you can get in this thing. It's such an intense environment. My wife and son wanted to try it. This was a couple of years ago. And I said, okay, get in this. As soon as you get in, I want you to stare at my hand and count to 10. Okay, I gave them their first horizon, basically. As soon as you finish counting 10, pick another point and count and pick a number. Counter that. So I was giving them some horizons. They both got through a minute and a half, right? So wow. There are some of these environments that you can add intensity and you can practice and develop this a little faster, which is why, ice baths or even really tough workouts could be, even there's not uncertainty in there, there's intensity. Yeah. So, and focus.
And I would say, like working out, if you haven't worked out, you don't go and load 315 on the bar.
Right.
So if you're just like, I really want to get better at challenging myself.
Yeah.
Maybe don't go to the ice bath. Go, take a walk around your house.
Yeah, whatever's on the edge of your comfort zone. In other words, so a little bit harder than you want to do, but not hard enough that you'll kill yourself.
Man, I could see that being so powerful. Like, write an outline.
Yeah.
I mean, because then you do that, and everybody's had to, even in, like, I remember in high school, like, you got to write a report. It's like, I'll just write one paragraph. But then by the time you do that, you're like done with it. You're like, holy shit, I didn't even know.
Well, and that's, you asked me, I've written 2 books. That's exactly how I did both of them. In fact, my first book wasn't even an outline. I had to write a proposal. I had an agent. Huber and I did this together, and so we had an agent. So they were helping me, but we wrote a proposal within a couple days for the attributes. And to do it, I was like, okay, how would I map out this book? I'm going to do first couple chapters, I'll talk about the concepts. Then I'm going to do a chapter per attribute, and I laid out, like, back then. The first draft was 36 attributes, and then I'll have a conclusion. That was my first thing, right? And then it just modifies, right? So the first horizon was just that.
That's cool. So let me ask you this. So you talk about, like, you're probably born with certain innate strengths, but everybody has the ability to develop and to some degree manipulate or enhance their strengths and so forth. And then there's this concept of leadership. Now, you have led at the very highest levels possible in the military. You've led people that are not necessarily easy to lead.
Some of the best people in the world. Yeah.
Absolutely. And because of that, they would demand of a leader an extremely, because excellent people aren't going to follow a excellent leader.
That's right.
So how, in terms, I have, like, this huge curiosity about this. Like, why is it that some people become leaders? Some people want to be leaders,
and they're not,
and then they aren't very good at it. Yeah. Some people don't want to be leaders, and they become leaders. Some people want to become leaders, and when they become the leader, they realize they didn't want to be the leader. Because there's a lot of responsibility that goes with that. Yeah. How does that? If you were to sort of, like, this is maybe a broad question,
it's actually really simple to answer. And the simple answer is, it's because leadership is a behavior, not a position. And the caveat, the ancillary comment to that is, we don't get to self-designate. We don't get to call ourselves leaders. Right. That's like calling yourself good looking or funny. Other people decide.
Or funny looking.
Yeah, or funny looking. Other people decide whether or not you're someone they want to follow. Listen, I was an officer in the teams. I was in charge. Yes. Yeah. Okay. And I was in charge of, a lot, since I was an ensign. Whether or not I was a leader depended on how I behaved and what the people I was in who were in my span of care thought of me. And there were times that, there are certainly times where people comes out and said, "Hey, Rich, I loved working with you. I felt you were a great leader." There are other times that people don't say anything at all, and I would say those are probably times where I was just the guy in charge. I wasn't behaving in that way. So leadership is about behavior. Behavior is about performance. And so when we talk about leadership and what we do is we say, this leadership's great, and there's a lot of great leadership stuff out there. And some of our compadres have some really good, solid leadership stuff out there. The way we approach it is, yes, all that, but it starts with performance. Leadership starts with performance. And if we understand how we're going to perform and how we're going to behave, we can understand how we're going to behave towards others and how they're going to see us behave.
Yep.
And, oh, by the way, in the highest performing teams, the leadership position shifts. So this is a concept that I call dynamic subordination. And dynamic subordination is, I actually figured this out when I was running Green Team and I was watching close quarter combat, and for the audience, I guess close quarter combat, just the art and skill of going into buildings and rooms and clearing threats all the way to either rescue a hostage or get a bad guy. Very dynamic, very fast-paced evolution. At Green Team, you do it at a very high level.
Yeah.
But I recognized when I was watching this, it was funny because when you do close quarter combat, if say you're starting outside the kill house and it's a train of 4 people, and you're number 1 man and there's number 2 man, number 3 man, number 4 man. You guys go in there, okay? So number 1 man goes in, 2, 3, 4, you address the threats, and then the next threat might be closest to the number 3 man. Guess what? The number 3 man becomes the number 1 man, and everybody stacks on the number 3 man. And so you could literally go through a kill house of 15, 20 rooms, and it could be set up the same way, and your run could be different every time because it's constantly based on the shifting of the environment. So what I realized is, it's funny because leadership is, it's not the high performing teams don't look at the performance as this pyramid, this hierarchical pyramid, the kind of the I say you do, like you might see in traditional military. They don't look at it as a flat model, like everybody's, no one outranks anybody, we're all in this together. And they don't look at it as the servant leadership model where the pyramid's upside down because, again, burden is distributed. It's really this blob. It's this amoeba. And in this amoeba, the leader is wherever the leader needs to be in the moment. And so what that means is a dynamic subordinating team understands that problems and challenges and issues can come from any angle at any moment. When one does, the person who's closest to that problem and the most competent immediately steps up and takes lead. And everybody follows and supports. And then the environment shifts and someone else steps up. So I always say I was an officer on the teams. I went on hundreds of combat missions. I was in charge of every single one. It did not mean I was always being supported. In fact, most of the time I was supporting other people. Snipers, breachers, assaulters. Sometimes the environment would shift and support me. But this tells us something very interesting, and that is our job on a team, our responsibility on a team has nothing to do with our hierarchical position. It has everything to do with what we are there to contribute to the team. Now, if we are in charge of a team, one of our primary responsibilities, if we want to be seen as a leader, is to create that dynamically subordinating environment. That's what we do. And that takes performance. It takes certain behaviors, it takes specific attributes, so that you can generate that environment where people understand each other, they trust each other, and they feel empowered to step up and lead when they need to, and then step back and support when they need to support.
Wow. Yeah, that's not what most people think.
No, it's not.
That is not.
But this is what you can say. This is how the SEAL teams operate.
It's absolutely how the SEAL teams operate. That's very interesting. So in a business context, so you have a CEO, the one thing I would absolutely say is I've never seen a well-run company that didn't have what you're talking about.
You're 100% correct.
I've never,
even though they didn't define it that way, that's what they're doing.
No, that is true. And I think there's like merit to the servant leadership thing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it is about, it's not enslavement leadership, it's servant leadership. So you do have to. I think there's a degree of empathy.
Yes, 100%.
I think that's the big.
Yeah. Well, and servant leadership, in my mind, is creating an environment to allow people to grow and perform and be better. Listen, we know the best leaders. They're not the ones who are in front doing everything. They're in the back. They're empowering. They're inspiring. Right. And I used to tell this to my junior officers when they'd come in. I'd say, listen, you have to get comfortable with what I call the irony of leadership, and that is if you do your job correctly, you work yourself out of a job. Because you create a team that can run without you, and in many cases outrun you. That should be the goal of every leader. That is servant leadership.
Yep.
Yeah.
Do you have you had a time where you have like faced a challenge in leadership that you would say like this was the hardest thing I ever had to overcome as a leader?
Yeah, and I'll say that I'll just in recalling a time. I'm just trying to think of a time that involved the people in my span of care. And I think, Gosh, it's just such a great question. I'd have to really probably think about it. But
I just shot.
Yeah, I know. But I guess anytime we were in situations where I had someone who was in duress or distress or something was going on in their lives, whether personally or professionally, that was always a time where I really felt obligated and committed to helping people see through that. I think even if we go into combat, we went. I went overseas many times. One of the last times I was commanding officer of one of our squadrons, and so I was task force commander when I got there, and this was probably 2012 ish, 2012, 13 ish, and we got there, and the target list I was handed was a bunch of like low level Taliban dudes, and I was saying to myself, and we had been through extortion, we've been through all that stuff, and I'm not a risk adverse person, but I also am very cognizant of the fact that we are designed as a unit to do specific things, and we shouldn't be wasting our time on other things.
Yeah, risk.
And I remember saying to the guy who was in charge of me, who was a ranger, he was a good guy, but he was a little bit one note in terms of the way he saw the world. He was a numbers guy. For him, it was about put as many operations on the board, and that defines success. Mm-hmm. And I remember saying, I was like, Taliban is not our enemy right now. They're bad people, but we are here to fight Al Qaeda. That's who we're looking at. Where are the Al Qaeda targets? And of course, they were a lot harder to find and a lot less frequent.
Yep.
You had to do a lot of intel before you actually went on target, which means you're not necessarily going on target every night.
Yeah.
And I had to make a conscious choice with my intel officer, who fortunately thought the same way I did. He said, "You know what? We're not going to do this. We're going to focus on Al Qaeda." And our op tempo went down, and so now you have to sell that to your guys to a degree, and you have to sell it up. Now the guy immediately in charge of me didn't like it very much. He thought I was too risk adverse. Luckily, the guys above him, a couple SEALs, knew me, and they knew what I was about, so they had my back on that. But that was difficult in the sense that you're doing the right thing, but you're also hoping you're doing the right thing. Does that make sense? It's it seems paradoxical, but yeah.
So there's a lot there. That's a great story. After I asked the question, because it's a lot easier to ask questions.
Yeah.
I was like, man, how would I answer that question? But what you ended up right where I sort of came to the conclusion, when you're at the intersection of conflicting interests as the leader. Which is why, by the way, most people don't like being leaders.
Yes.
Once they find themselves in that position, is that there's not necessarily you have to be the gateway between the various forces.
Yeah.
You're gonna have the guys. Let's go out and get it done every night. You're gonna have the mission, the actual mission.
Yeah. The job, basically.
Right. No. And then you're gonna have all these people with a voice. They're stakeholders.
Yeah.
Probably not clear who's, I don't think anybody gets to make the order besides you.
Yeah.
So you've got all these things that are like coming together, and then you have to be the one. That's why it's lonely on top.
I was, it reminds me of another story that I'll tell. It's kind of a combat story, but nothing messy. It was my very first operation as a troop commander at Development Group. And I had already been there. I'd been the OPSO for one of the squadrons. I was waiting my turn.
Right.
And we went to Afghanistan. Finally, I had my own troop, and it was our very first mission. And as we planned this mission, little things were happening. Like little things were going wrong. Like, the crypto switched out the night before. We had to get that sorted out. The vehicles, we had our QRF dropped out. We had to get another thing going. We maybe had some gaps here. As we're leaving, the vehicles have some issues. We had 3 different routes as we're going out. One route is fouled, second route's fouled. Now we're on the third route. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now all of these things, I call them kind of like check marks. And my belief has always been as a leader, especially in that environment, but you could apply this to any environment, that we are responsible for collecting those check marks. And there's a certain point, none of those check marks were big enough individually to cancel the mission or make a decision to cancel the mission
on their own.
Right. But we also know that after action reviews are chock full of all of these, well, why didn't they see that? All these things that, red flags, this. You can't see them in the moment, but you have to notice them in the moment. And I think that our responsibility is to add those up. Now, there's a certain number, depending on what we're doing, depending on the mission, the number is always different, that we as leaders have to say, okay, that's enough. That's my limit. Okay. And so for us, it was, we finally got to our place where we're parking the vehicles. We were on the patrol in, and we hear whistling. Okay. And I remember having read a couple nights before of a unit an American unit that had been ambushed. And right before they were ambushed, they heard whistling. And so I immediately stopped the patrol, and I bring my troop chief. And thankfully, my troop chief was awesome, and he was we were in sync, because we know how important that is. You have to, your number 2 has to be.
That's it.
And I was like, hey, I don't feel good. He's like, I don't either. So I literally, I turned the mission around. You know, I quit the mission. I always talk about I wrote a blog on this, and I basically said it's okay to quit, but never give up. And what I meant by that is, you might be on the path and you're just doing the wrong thing. You have to quit what you're doing.
Yeah.
But turning around on that op, my very first op, calling my boss, who was a ranger, saying, "Hey, we're coming home. This is not working out."
Yeah.
It was a tough decision.
Well, and what you did, you weighed type 1, type 2.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, and it's so type 1, the upside is nothing happened.
Yes.
And the downside is potentially devastating.
Yes. Yeah.
And
the problem as well is it's very rare that you get confirmation that your decision was correct.
Exactly.
Because
to this day, you could have a very different story about that night.
That's right.
You could have a tragic story.
Yeah, but we also could have had a spectacular. I mean, this is you just don't know. You're going with, this is the hard part about leadership, is you're making decisions on information at the moment, and in some cases the decision you make may not be validated. Now, for us, in terms of getting the targets, right? Yeah. In other words, I don't know if we would have gotten ambushed. I don't know if it wouldn't tragic. The good news is, 2 nights later, same target shows up somewhere else. We go get him, right? Exactly. So we still got the guy.
Right.
But in that specific case, you're making decisions, and this is the hard part.
And it may not be popular.
It may not be popular. And this is one you have to sell up and down the chain, because guys are pissed. They're like, why are we stopping? And I've turned around out of the hundreds of missions, I've turned around on 3.
Yeah.
And every single one was a very difficult decision, and it was a decision that was made because of these check marks, and it had to be sold up and down.
So if you think to that, time, like if you put yourself back, and I can sort of picture it, because it's night, everybody's like on a knee, whatever. You're talking this through. If you could, do you have do your own after action related to what we just talked about, where it's like you've got these various chemicals going on.
Yeah.
You have to compartmentalize and chunk up these things to make this decision. Would you be able to analyze and say, like, my thought process was I took the best case, the worst case, I did a probability of each or something. Yeah. How did you come to the decision?
That's a really good one. Neurologically, I have no clue. We'd have to get Huberman on the line. We'd have to phone a friend on that one. But I think this is where if you are able to master uncertainty, i.e., you have the ability to do this stuff without thinking, you become very advanced in the way you look at even current environments. I remember, and on every mission, planning in my head was ongoing. I'd be patrolling, and as I'm patrolling, there's not much going on, right? We're just walking, and I'm saying to myself, okay,
what if this?
What if this? What if that? What am I going to do? What's the next out? Where am I? You're constantly saying to yourself, what might happen? And it's not from a point of anxiety. It's a point maybe it is. Maybe it's a healthy anxiety. It's a version of, I don't want this to happen, or if this happens, I want to be prepared. So I think it's but this is also, you bring up a great point, is we don't and shouldn't demonize fear. Fear is nature's risk assessment tool. Fear is supposed to be there. I mean, fear tells us, hey, pay attention, there's a threat. Yeah. You know as well as I do, any healthy SEAL will agree, if we saw fearlessness in another person, we got away from that person.
Sociopath, or psychopath.
I mean, there was a leader, I remember when I was a young officer, who said, Rich, beware the fearless leader, because that person's going to get you killed. And so it goes with any fearless person. Anybody who's fearless is subject to complacency and bulldog approach and not thinking through. Yeah. And so fear can and should be used beneficially. Shouldn't stop us, but maybe, managing in a way that a little bit of anxiety keeps, every time I skydive, I didn't like it, right? That it meant on the way up, which is always the hardest part, I'm rehearsing my EPs, right? And thinking through it. I'm double checking my gear, making sure everything's tight. That led to no complacency and led to me doing the right thing. So
I always like the expression, it should be 51% fear and 49% fun.
Yeah.
Never let that ratio flip-flop.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I don't know if I was able to get to 49% on my jumps, but,
The first one of the day always was god-awful.
Yeah, that's right.
And then, after that, the whole day I could jump.
Yeah.
But then the next morning it reset. And I was like, holy shit.
No, I know. Yeah, it was, and I haven't jumped in a while, so it'd be...
I will never jump again. It was fun while it lasted.
Yeah, so...
When you talk about the uncertainty and sort of that mastering, practicing that, getting to that point where you can do it fluidly.
Yeah.
What would be the best? So if a person wanted to develop that in themselves, because I think that if you talk about the attributes of a leader, again, the leader who's earning being a leader, not the person in charge.
Right.
But do you think that, because everybody's like, oh, I want to develop leadership.
Yes.
I want to, there's seminars, there's books, there's training, there's people that talk about what to do to become a leader.
Yeah.
How would you practice these, or is it just practicing what we've just discussed, that ability to put yourself in those uncomfortable situations, think through that? How do you get to that point where you can be the one that makes the extremely difficult decision in the moment? Mm-hmm. Are there exercises or?
Well, I would say certainly practicing the moving horizons wherever in whatever endeavor you're in helps. And again, you don't have to have environments of uncertainty. You can do this anywhere. You can do this at work when you're putting together a presentation, writing a book, writing an email. You could do it.
Yeah.
Exercising those muscles, and so that'll help. In terms of leadership, again, it's because it's all about behavior. It's about modeling the behavior. People follow others because they see behaviors they want to model, they want to embody. Yeah. And so modeling a behavior that you want to see more of, and then rewarding the behavior you want to see more of. If you're in a position in charge and you want to be seen as a leader, then you create an environment where people are empowered and inspired and doing their thing, and you're allowing them to be all that they can be, and you have empathy and all that stuff. You will be looked at as a leader. If you are someone who's not in a position to in charge and you want to be seen as a leader, then you have to just behave in a way that hopefully people,
so it starts with you.
Yeah, it starts with you.
Know thyself.
And again, it's such a subjective thing. I mean, it is a great example. In the book I talk about leadership attributes, and since then we've shifted the categories, and we kept 3 primary leadership attributes, and those attributes are authenticity, accountability, and decisiveness. The theory being that in most cases, people who see that type of behavior, decisiveness, authenticity, and accountability, will say, "Ooh, that's someone I want to follow." Okay, and in most cases that's true. All right, but let's take accountability. Okay, many of us, especially in the military, can agree that accountability is a really important attribute for leadership, because when we see people who point fingers and place blame,
the weakest thing.
It's the weakest thing, right? However, we have real world current examples of leaders right now today who have zero accountability, and they are seen as amazing leaders. And again, I'm saying this without judgment. I'm saying this as a non-judgmental observation that we pick our leaders based on how we subjectively judge that person, because whereas most of us think, man, accountability, that's a really important leadership. Nope, doesn't have to be. People are going to pick leaders based on who they want to follow and how they see behavior. So this is why you can have like you talked about, those different versions. The unconscious leader who's like, oh, I didn't know I was a leader. The person who becomes a leader is like, I didn't want this, but they just are. The person who's not in a position of not in charge of anything, but they're followed, and so many different versions.
Yeah.
But this is also as parents, we're leaders, or we endeavor to be, because there are parents who aren't. Who don't behave like leaders either. So,
I've drawn that parallel when I've been in a leadership position, and it's kind of the same with your kid.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
You can't fast forward and see if I make this decision right now for this child, I know exactly what's going to happen.
Oh yeah.
You do the best thing you can think of in that time.
Yeah.
And you never know the outcome, and it's always that way in those positions of leadership. But I think it's about the consistency, especially of the consistency of your ultimate desire.
Yes, and it's about the desire. It's about the true desire in you to bring the best out of the people around you. Okay, because again, you look at kids. Kids is a great example, and the question would be, any of us who are parents, when your child was learning how to walk, how many times did they fall before you said, you know what, we're done, we're not doing this anymore, right? The answer is it doesn't. There's no amount of times the kids going to learn how to walk. The kids going to learn how to walk. Now, to a smaller degree, leaders have to look at that in their organizations and their people. You are there to get the best out of people. Now, again, there's performance, and the competence matters. It certainly does, right? But are you, if there's perceived low performance or even failure, are you looking inward first? Are you taking accountability for the environment you're creating first? And making sure that's tight before you start pointing fingers. And that's the idea.
Well, I like decisiveness, accountability,
and authenticity.
Yeah. That is spot on. And especially, so the accountability is holding yourself accountable, as much as it is being held accountable by others.
Yeah, in fact, it's more that, because if you don't hold yourself accountable, yet you hold other people accountable, that doesn't count. And I always say, as leaders, and we've all experienced some of these leaders, unfortunately, they're not leaders, they're in charge. Leaders they can always delegate responsibility, they can never delegate accountability. And those who try to delegate both or do delegate both are not seen as leaders. And I had a couple leaders like that, or I had a couple people in charge like that who would delegate. In other words, these are the people who will often let the rope out and let you run. And if you screw up, they don't have your back. It's your fault.
Right.
And you can't do that. That's like, I'm going to let you grow and empower you. But if you screw up, you're cut off. So.
Well, and I think too, so like in the organizations that I've run, the thing that I made very clear is we are going. If you're not failing, you're not even. You're not part of the team. Because you're not trying.
You're not trying. Yeah.
Like we have to innovate this business model, the product, the way we do everything has to be constantly innovated, which means inevitably that there's going to be failure. There's going to be type 1 errors.
Yeah. If people are afraid to fail, then there's no trust in that organization, right? So there was a company when I first got out of the Navy. I was working with a leadership company, and they did work with it was a patent organization that did patents, and they'd have an annual celebration or award ceremony where they awarded like the most successful patents. But then at every time during that ceremony, they'd bring all the people on stage who tried to get patents but didn't. They never got them through, and they rewarded them because
I love that.
Because they were like, hey, what you're doing, we need you to keep doing what you're doing. It's just as important.
Like the ecosystem.
Yeah, it's just as important to be trying. Not everything will get through, but we can't have you stop trying. So,
that's cool.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about now what you do, because you work with organizations, companies, businesses, that sort of thing, to bring these principles. What does that look like? What is the dynamic of bringing this stuff to a team in a way that it's like actionable and enhances them?
Well, so the Masters of Uncertainty stuff we've just begun to roll out. We have a workshop that we give, and I give a keynote. So that's still in its beginning phases. The biggest part of the process that people need to understand about themselves are their attributes. And so our company right now is centered around helping organizations and teams understand their own individual attribute profile, and then understanding each other's and seeing how they effectively work together, not only as a team so that they can actually be better, but also now can they identify gaps and can they use that information to hire better. So hiring for attributes versus skills, which is what the SEAL teams do. We hire for attributes versus skills.
Yeah, that's fun.
And so we go into organizations, we help them with these concepts. We help them tweak their hiring. We give them workshops. We give them our assessment tool, and have them all begin to understand that. And so that's what we're focused on. And we're scaling and looking to grow and create some things that allow for even further and deeper use for organizations. Because some of our best clients, kind of our early adopters, they've been using this now for a couple of years. They've been using attributes.
That's a great data set.
And tell you, their for example, their retention for hiring has gone in some cases from only 40% retention to 80% or 90% retention. In other words, they're hiring the right people the first time because they're hiring based on attributes. And so our business is centered around helping people understand that concept. And then we'll grow some other things around the tools of mastering uncertainty and things like that. But the attributes is a big piece, so that's why we're focused on that.
Yeah, that's incredible. Anything else you wanted to talk about today?
No, this was. We could talk for hours.
We could talk for hours.
And then put beer in our hand, and then it's game over. We'd run out of tape. Listen. I think first of all, I always love to get the word out to anybody who will listen, because I think I get excited about this stuff for two reasons. First, it will allow people to obviously deal with uncertainty when it hits without warning. And if there's one thing certain, is that uncertainty is going to hit you. And so if we can deal with that when it hits us without warning, that's great. But more importantly, more exciting to me, is this idea that if we understand, practice, and train and get good at these things, we then will deliberately step into uncertainty. And this is where evolution and growth and discovery happens. We don't grow as human beings inside our comfort zone. We have to step outside of it. And so the gift that we have been given as SEALs is that, we had some of this going to SEAL training. That's why we went in the first place. But the gift that we've been given about hyper developing this is that we have what I call true confidence. We know, hey, I'm going to go on this thing. I'm going to just start walking the road, and things are going to happen that I can't anticipate. I'll take care of it along the way. That's our confidence, and we do, and we just know there's going to be dips and valleys and peaks. But this is a superpower if you can get it get it going. So that's what I'm excited to get people into. That's
so cool. I've read the books. They are extremely powerful. These techniques are extremely powerful. I think it's true. It's a superpower.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible. I think I've had more of my questions answered in this last hour than I have in years.
That's good.
Especially the neuro stuff and understanding the tangible reasons why we react in the ways that we do. But just super, super interesting. I highly recommend to read these books, to really give the consideration to how you're pushing yourself, developing that neuroscience in you, and it's really incredible. What you do is incredible, Rich. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, brother.
And I think the world can really benefit from what you're doing. So,
well, thank you. They can find it at theattributes.com, a one-stop shop. You can get the
all
books.
the stuff.
You can do books, workshops, everything there, assessments. So theattributes.com is where it all is right now. So, and of course Instagram and LinkedIn.
Very cool. And we'll put all those links up and whatnot. Highly recommend.